Hello and welcome to SkaredCast. Today we're looking at an exclusive ITC mission tactical video for mission 5, Precious Cargo. So sit back, relax, and let's take a look at the mission in all the different deployment types available for the ITC Championship missions. Hello and welcome to another tactical video. Today we're looking at scenario 5 of the ITC Championship mission, Precious Cargo. So the way that one of these exclusive tactical videos works, this is the tabletop. We're going to put the different deployment types out, and we're going to look at mission 5, Precious Cargo, where you set up 4 objectives. Each objective is placed essentially in every table quarter, like this, and you get to move one 6 inches before the game starts. So let's take a look at the first type of deployment. And here we have the first deployment we're going to talk about, Dawn of War deployment. So 12 inches up to 12 inches up. And we have 4 objectives, 1 each in every table quarter, 18 inches from the shortboard edge and 12 inches from the side. So in this deployment, we've talked about how you're looking at playing the deployment game, trying to out-deploy your opponent. There's not a lot of room to hide, and the enemy can be on you pretty quickly if they have a very aggressive force. So you get to choose one of the two objectives, and you get to move it 6 inches in any direction in order to make it your priority objective. So it really depends on what style of army you are playing. If you want to be very, very aggressive, you could potentially grab your objective and move it closer to the other objectives, increasing the distance but decreasing the distance that you have to control different objectives. Now that is a very aggressive way to do it. A lot of folks will either move it 6 inches back or 6 inches towards the table edge to increase the distance that the enemy has to go to get to this objective. Something that is important to note is that you get a bonus point in this mission by controlling your priority objective and your enemy's priority objective. If you control your opponent's priority objective, you get an additional bonus point. So it makes the priority objective, whichever one you pick, very important for things like bonus points and stuff like that. So it is usually important to kind of hide it and then be able to push up, and that generates more space. Now don't forget that your enemy is going to be able to do this. So if you want to try, if your army is a lot more elite, and you have these 2 objectives, and you don't want to have to spread out too much to get objectives, you can always move it closer to the objective to have an easier time collecting both of them. If you want the enemy to spread out, don't be afraid to spread it out. Now, this can vary based on whether or not your opponent has picked an objective and what they've done with theirs. So if they say pick this objective and move it 6 inches back that way, you know, you can, if you'd like, make the game even more spread out by grabbing the further objective and making it even more. So now you've spread out these objectives way past each other. Another thing you could do is potentially, if you want to be very, very aggressive, just kind of put the primary objectives right in their face and jump right at them. Or increase the distance that they're going to have to go here, making the distance between the primary objectives, you know, 30 some inches or so. And then forcing the opponent to spread out this way, whereas you can do this. Another thing you can do is just do this here and consolidate your strength here while they kind of spread their strength out, which then makes you being able to control these 3 objectives a lot easier with enemy like units in this zone, then giving you more of a chance to hold more objectives at as the game continues. So for Dawn of War, that's very important because your armies are going to be spread out within this 12-inch bubble over here. So don't forget that that's something that you can do. So now let's take a look at Pointy Dawn of War. Okay, and here we have Pointy Dawn of War. So in this deployment, you have a lot more room in the middle. You have a lot less room on the sides. And the distance on the sides is a lot further from unit to unit than it is in the middle. So units in the middle here have an easier chance to kind of threaten any of the objectives. So when you're looking at your priority objective, the same sort of strategy stays true. You can either pull it back this way and even create more distance in between the enemy and your objective. Or put it even further this way here, to make it easier for you to zone out the back corner by keeping an enemy, a unit, like a 5-man rack unit or a scout squad or something, to stop deep strikers from getting into your backfield here. So that's something to keep in mind. If you want to go more aggressive, you can put it towards the middle, like this, and then, of course, make it shorter distance here. However, you know, you've definitely shortened the distance that the enemy can do. So I wouldn't recommend doing this against a very aggressive sort of army. You know, the table is finite in space. So if your enemy decides to, once again, move that back behind like a ruin or something, you know, something you could potentially do is just make them have to go a lot further distance and creating a very large distance between the two objectives over here. Now these two objectives stay relatively close by, they're only 24 inches apart, which means you can put a lot of pressure here. And once again, if you want to threaten and keep it tight, you can actually make sure that by closing the objectives together, if you have a very elite army, you have more control over short objectives. Maybe, you know, not put as much pressure on their primary objectives, but go for hold more objectives, especially if you feel like you're going to want to go second and play a more reactive game. So in both Dawn of War and Pointy Dawn of War, we have that same sort of style of objective placement. But what happens when we turn the table completely around and we do something like Hammer and Anvil and Pointy Hammer and Anvil? Okay, welcome to Hammer and Anvil. In this deployment zone, we have a 24-inch deployment zone, 24 inches in between for No Man's Land, and a 24-inch deployment zone. So here, it's 18 inches up, so you have about 6 inches in the space here. So it's a lot easier in this style of deployment to have better control over both your objectives. What I'm saying is very simple. You move your priority objective closer to the other objective, shrinking the amount of space that you need, and it's very easy to control both of these objectives with one unit. It also makes it a lot harder for the enemy to kind of swing around and kind of come and get your objective, which is very important. Depending on what army you're playing, you could potentially do this and go way back if you have a lot of backfield stuff that you really want to kind of hide. Or if the enemy has a very aggressive army that wants to get to your objectives sooner than later. Now, especially when deploying something back like this against a close combat army, you want to put the units that control the objective potentially all the way back here. You know, 3 inches away from the objective. And what that does is, although you're controlling this objective, it'll make the charge distance a lot longer when somebody's trying to get to that. So they can't use the movement. Like if you're controlling this objective with units up here like this, it's going to add like 8 inches to the distance that the enemy can charge if they're coming at you this way. So just a little thing to keep in mind there. If your opponent decides to consolidate their objective base and hold that, then something you might want to do, if they're kind of going to be pressuring that side, you know, that really depends on you. But you could either mimic it and go with them, or you could pull it aside to kind of like entice them to spread out and come this way. But all in all, you want to try and make it hard for your opponent to get this objective, while at the same time make it easier for you to hold this objective. And the same sort of thing is true when you're playing in Pointy Hammer and Anvil. So in order to just kind of see the difference here, you have 12 inches up, you have the 27-inch bubble up here, like this, and then it generates like a pointy line like that. And what it's done here is it's essentially put that objective right on the line of the deployment zone, and therefore it becomes a lot easier to kind of protect it if you just do something like this. Now the enemy, you know, the enemy has a lot longer to go from side to side if their corner is something like this. Whether or not they have the distance to do it, that's completely up to them. But if the enemy has moved theirs, it's very unlikely the unit that's over here is going to be able to go all the way down here to capture this objective. So, you know, in anything, I would recommend you consolidate and just push straight up this way, unless you have units that can deep strike or move very quickly like some of the Drukhari units can. So in both Hammer and Anvil and Pointy Hammer and Anvil, the same sort of strategy is the same. You can either consolidate your objectives, right, to have less units that have to take care of these and push up with more, or you can force the enemy to spread out if they want to consolidate their army and they have an army with lots of buffs and auras, or things like that as well. So just something to keep in mind. So let's go on to the two more skewed forms of deployment, table quarters and vanguard strike. Okay, so here we are. Table quarters. An 18-inch bubble in the middle and two table quarters. Now, even though you can pick any objective to be your priority objective, I highly recommend you don't pick any of the ones in no man's land. If you were to pick either this objective, yes, you could potentially move it closer and whatnot. However, what you're doing is you're essentially giving your opponent an easy access to a bonus point if they can put a unit of infiltrators, or essentially just move not very far at all to any of those objectives. So when you're playing this sort of mission, you're pretty much going to make the objective in your table quarter your priority objective, unless you have some crazy plan, in which case, hey, let me know what you were thinking, please. But if you want it to be harder for your enemy to come at you, say they're a very aggressive army, you can potentially move your objective back. This generates it more room. If you want to make it easier for you to hold the two objectives, you can do this again, and once again consolidate the objectives. The other option that is possible is if you want to if you're the very aggressive army, you can move it up this way, making it a lot shorter distance to control these objectives, but also making less distance from you to the enemy. So by pushing it up forward, it means that you'll then, if you're a very aggressive army, you don't have to commit anything to the backfield to really kind of safeguard that sort of stuff whatsoever. So in this sort of deployment style, you're going to essentially pick, the objective in your quarter to be your priority objective. You want to make sure that it's helping you get other objectives, whether you're trying to be aggressive and push into the enemy, whether you don't have a lot of units and you want to control more objectives, or whether or not you want to zone the backfield and play more conservatively based on the enemy that you're playing. And now we look at the last deployment style, Vanguard Strike. Okay, and we return with Vanguard Strike. Now in Vanguard Strike, very similar, in which case you're going to have one objective in your deployment zone. Now in this case, because the deployments are a little different, you can, if you would like to gamble by making one of these your priority objective and pulling it towards your deployment zone, what it does is it kind of helps you dictate the style of the battle. Yes, it could be aggressive, but in this style of mission, it might pay off more if you're very aggressive. Something I like doing with the Drukhari is turning this style of deployment into a hammer and anvil style deployment. So I'll essentially push up the side here and turn this table or this deployment into this, giving me a lot more room to face off against the enemy. So being able to pull an objective like this backwards and making it my priority objective, now it's very easy for me to control these two objectives right here. With this deployment zone, or this deployment style, yes, the enemy can kind of push up this way, but if I've put a lot of strength on this, anything that goes for this objective is paramount to suicide, which then allows me to flip the table this way and generate a lot more space and room towards the enemy. Now, because the enemy has probably picked this as their primary and pushed it back, I've suddenly created a lot more room between those two objectives. And if I do have strength here and push up, all of a sudden I'm in good control of three objectives. And as you can see, doing something like this has totally skewed the objective game, given me a huge advantage over objective control, while my opponent is stuck with one lonely objective in the backfield. So you can think outside of the box when looking at the objectives like this. And in this deployment style, doing something like that can pay off in dividends if you're willing to essentially gamble a little bit as well. Of course, if the enemy has a very heavy close combat army, that might not be the best choice, in which case you can do the same sort of thing by pushing this guy forward, and at the same with table quarters, putting it back to generate more space in between. So because I play a lot of Talos and a lot of aggressive close combat units, a lot of the times putting it closer and bridging the gap between the two objectives is very effective, as it allows me to really kind of generate less space in between the two objectives, giving me a lot more leverage when it comes to the game. So that's the last deployment style for mission 5. So let me know in the comments what it is you feel that would be the best strategy to employ when you're playing this mission as well. And we'll return with a post-tactical recap. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed this tactical video in terms of mission 5, Precious Cargo. Now, it is always important to look at the consequences of moving something in terms of objectives and things like that. So make sure that you keep in mind when you're playing the long-term consequences of the objective game. I hope you guys really enjoyed this tactical video, and the last one, Mission 6, will be up as well soon. So make sure you stay tuned. Thank you so much for continuously supporting the channel and the content I create. If you have any comments, suggestions, or anything like that you'd like me to work on, let me know. Send me a message and I will do my best to get to it. I am Skari, your grateful host, my faithful denizens, and I hope you enjoy, and I hope you take this information and go crush some souls.